last example I want to show is just showing you how robust this kind of process can be. And this came out of a requirement about a year or a year and a half ago for me, where I got involved with someone who was actually leaving PBS. They weren't leaving PBS for the general ledger and accounts payable and so on, but they had decided to offload their payroll. And what they wanted me to do was to provide a series of CSV files that could be sent to Ceridian to load up the payroll files. So a CSV of the employee file, a CSV of a variety of other files. One of those, which was quite problematic, which was the deductions. And that issue, that problem arose because in PBS, as those of you who are run real-world payroll know, that the permanent deductions, there are 12 of them, the permanent deductions are all held in one page within the employee file. So you have one employee records, but there are a whole bunch of fields that have to do with the 12 different deductions. That's not the way Ceridian wanted it. What they wanted was one record for each deduction for each employee. And how was I going to do something like that? Well, the final major tip about this for Excel and Crystal and so on and so forth is that you can point between one record of a file and a different record in the same file. And I think maybe what I want to do first is just, I have an example here that maybe, yeah. For the same client, at one point, they wanted a reasonably readable payroll change log, something that they could simply scan and see what had changed where. So what they wanted was to be able to see the name or the street or whatever had changed. Now, for those of you who have looked at the change log, it's basically unreadable. It's basically a big dump. And if you really wanted to go through and find out what was happening, if someone made a change to Peter Dalziel within this period, this date period, you simply couldn't do it very easily. So what this report was attempting to do was show the before and after as of a date for everybody for whom changes had been made. You can see in this particular case, we changed Michael from $14 an hour to $14.50 an hour regular and $21 to $21.75 overtime and so on and so forth. And there are potentially other changes out here that have to do with their 401k status and so on and so forth. Now, this is made up data. It looks real, but it's kind of made up data, so we're not violating any privacy here. But the important point here is when we look at the setup of the database, I come back here to my links, and now what will be the familiar screen about the links. You can see what I'm doing here is I'm linking the payroll change employee file to itself. That is, the employee date, the serial number, and the sequence number. Now, one thing you may not be aware is that the change employee file has two record types. It's a type 1, which is the old, and a type 2, which is the new. This is the transaction type. So you see that I'm not using the transaction type. So what I'm really doing is if there were a change, this would map to itself. It would also map to the after picture as well. And so what I'm going to be doing here as far as this linkage is concerned is to generate a whole bunch of self-links in terms of my composite record. And then off all of that, I'm going to pick up some customer extended fields. This particular client used the customer extended for all sorts of good stuff. So I wanted to bring that in. So having set this up, that is having this file mapped to itself, then what I did was I used the selection function here to control what records I actually saw. So I said, when I'm looking at the old record, it has to be a type 1 record, which is an old record. When I'm looking at the new record, whatever it is, or the secondary record, what I want to do, let me just pass this up here. When I'm looking at the second pointed to record, it has to be a type 2 record. So the net effect of pointing to myself and then making sure that the from and the to were two different record types, I now have the two linked as before and after. And then I could go through a whole razzmatazz in here. You can see there's a huge number of fields in here in which I was fixing formats and determining if the city had changed. For instance, here it's determining if there's a no change in the city. So if the city code from the before record is the same as the city code from the after record, I put an equal into this value. Otherwise, I put another character, which then meant I could go through, I could say, if this particular value is an equal, then I don't need to print anything. If it's two exclamation marks, then I need to print some before and after data. And that's the sort of thing I went through for actually printing these values all the way through. But the net effect is, you can see, as a result of having pointed to myself and then done selections, I can actually put together a relatively neatly formatted report that quickly allows us to see what the changes are. Now, having shown this ability to point to another record, let me show you the ultimate for that, which is this function, this report. Now, again, coming back to the fact that we're doing a conversion to Ceridian, and we have to take the 12 deduction code fields, and we have to put each deduction for each employee on a separate line. Well, the first part is easy. I can just create a detail line that actually has 12 lines in it. The other part was a bit more difficult, and we'll wind up just showing how robust this functionality is. Here what I've done is I've started off with the employee file, and I've actually made 9 copies of the deduction codes. And I've created, this is another feature, but I'm now linking to another database for the summary deductions. Those linkages look like this. And it'll take a second for it to bring up. There we go. So what we're looking at here is the employee file pointing to each of the 9 different copies of the deduction codes, because we have 9 numbered deduction codes in the employee file. So for deduction code number 6, I'm going to use the code there to look up a unique value in the deduction code file. For deduction code 7, I'm going to come up here and look. Now, these are all looking up the same file, but since we're having to do it 9 different times with potentially 9 different codes, I have to have 9 separate pseudo copies of that file. Now, in addition, the Ceridian conversion required a year-to-date total for the deductions, and that's simply not available in Passport. So the final takeaway here of what you can do is, what I did was I wrote, I've forgotten whether it was a spreadsheet or a Crystal report. I think it was a Crystal report. I wrote a Crystal report which summarized all the deductions by deduction by employee, and wrote that as a report, which then got exported to an Access database. So I now had an Access database that had employee number, deduction, and year-to-date total. Well, I could then link that using Crystal and the SQL stuff. I could then link that in Crystal just like I was linking the PBS data, except now I was linking in an Access data field. Whoops. I was now linking in an Access database and you can mix and match. And that's the final takeaway. Besides this being robust enough to take care of this kind of nonsense with what is this? This is something like 19 different references and complicated relationships. Besides doing that, we're actually looking at PBS data for this guy and all of these guys, but we're looking at Access data for all of these guys. So we can actually mix and match. So you have an outside database that has the same keys. You can just pull them in, whether it's Excel or Access or Crystal. All of these pull this stuff together using these SQL commands and allow you to run this stuff. So I think we'll finish off with that.